Good afternoon, Dr. Christiansen. The room got very quiet. Everybody was waiting. So we'll start with Mrs. McQuinn.
Okay.
Hi, Dr. Christiansen.
Good afternoon.
With our limited resources, what will you do differently to attain the outcomes we expect for our students?
Thank you for that question. And first of all, I'm honored to be here. I just want to wish the best to my two colleagues, Keith Oswald and Donald Fenoy, and I'm really honored to be here. I think in the past 3 years, we've very much focused on optimizing resources. If you look at our strategic plan and the way it's set up, we very much are focused on how do we deliver a return on investment on the investments that we make in academics. So specifically looking at federal streams like Title I, Title II, our operational money. Initially when we came in, we had ERS study. How do we use time, people, and money to make decisions? And as a result of that, alongside Mike Burke, our CFO, we very much realized that we had some areas we needed to improve. For example, how we made investments around second language learners, how we made investments around some of our at-risk struggling schools. So we did make adjustments to the way we did things, and we've gotten results over the last 3 years. If you look, for example, at the number of schools that were under state oversight, we had 36 back in 2015. And now, 3 years later, we have 3 that are under the DA priority oversight. So clearly, some of the decisions we made around optimizing resources paid off, and we delivered results and a return on investment.
I don't have a follow-up. Thank you.
I'll go last, so we'll go to Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. And before I ask my question, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but aren't the candidates supposed to give us an introduction, make an opening comment to us, or am I missing something? Did that change? Or is it?
No, I think that they were
okay.
At the end.
Sorry for my misunderstanding.
Okay.
Things are just a little stressful. Anyway, good afternoon, Dr. Christiansen.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So my question is, what do you consider to be your greatest strengths as a potential superintendent and your greatest weaknesses as a potential superintendent?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And by the way, I just want to briefly say that my background is one of faith, family, and focus. So I grew up with a hospice nurse mom and a pastor dad where we asked, life's essential question is essentially, how do we serve others? And so they built in me early on this concept around service and how do we make the world a better place and asking those questions. So I think one of my greatest strengths is that I'm committed to serve others and committed to, I'm mission driven. I really feel called to do what I do, and it's a deep commitment. So I think service is one of my, service orientation would be one of my strengths. I think another one of my strengths is that I'm highly competitive. I do want to win in terms of results, and when I say that, it's really results driven around equity. So for me, all means all, and we really need to make sure we focus on the needs of every student and how we have all students reach their full potential. Second language learners, various subgroups. Obviously, we've done deep work around that and driven by equity. So I would say a strength is competition through the lens of equity. I would say on the weaknesses, I can be impatient. You know, I want to see results. And some people misconstrue that as demanding, and I think they look at me through the lens of the deputy superintendent, but they may not see the shift that I would make if I was superintendent, and that I would very much balance pressure and support. And I know that our school system is driven by 2 levers, the quality of the teacher, the quality of the principal. Those are the 2 primary levers. And what we would need to do is make sure teacher voice and principal voice figure prominently in our work and how we do things moving forward.
Thank you. I don't have a follow-up.
All right. Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Christiansen. I'm
Afternoon.
really excited to be able to have this interview process today, so thank you for being here. The question I have is about the purpose-built communities. I wanted to ask you, do you support public and private partnerships that were designated to raise support from the philanthropic communities, and how do you feel about project-based learning?
Okay. On the first piece, purpose-built communities, I've actually seen that firsthand in Orlando in the Paramore community, right next to the Citrus Bowl there in Orange County. They had a private-public partnership around the purpose-built community concept. And what I was able to see is housing that actually met the needs of varying socioeconomic levels. Also, innovation around the way education took place within that neighborhood, and bringing project-based learning and some innovation into a kind of a K-8 system within that Paramore community, where the community really felt like they didn't need to leave Paramore anymore in order to get a high-quality education. So there was the housing piece, there was the education piece, and also private investment around what was happening in that community to make it a vibrant community. So I've seen that firsthand, and I am committed to that. If you look at my background in Fresno and in Lake, we did leave systems where we actually, for example, in Lake, where we had a industry partner in South Lake Hospital. We had University of Central Florida. We had Lake Sumter College, and we had J.P. Morgan Chase, and we signed a 20-year MOU for a health sciences partnership where we would look at how, within the K-12 school system, we prepared students for the future health sciences careers, many of which we don't even understand yet, but working closely with Lake Sumter and the real industry partner, which is South Lake Hospital, in the Claremont area to help define that in real time and be able to innovate and constantly change to meet the needs of kids.
I do have a follow-up. How do you feel that you would be the face of and or lead the philanthropic efforts of this district?
Well, I think as superintendent, you are outward facing, so it's different than staff. Obviously, you've got to engage the community. And we have to celebrate our diversity and engage our 39 municipalities. We have to look at the whole county and all the stakeholders. But I think as superintendent, I would be active, not only individually as superintendent, but I would have a shared leadership philosophy where I think we can all take our opportunity within our leadership team and also the school board as a governance team to think about how we engage the community and how we understand their needs and their wants and how we need to improve. Yeah.
Mr. Barbieri.
Good afternoon, Dr. Christiansen.
Good afternoon.
As you know, this board has had many discussions about the need to have an employee in each school whose only purpose is to handle the socio-emotional needs of our children. Would you please tell us what plan you would put in place to provide support for students in crisis?
Yes, sir, and I think, in the wake of the Parkland tragedy, this is first and foremost an issue that we all have to deal with. One of the things I've been struck with here is a need for mental health counselors, social workers. So as we look at the governor's proposal on how we can look at school safety differently, we would not only want to look at a school resource officer in every school, we'd also want to look at how are we addressing the social emotional needs of children. We recently got a Wallace Foundation grant, a multi-million-dollar national grant, where we're working with our schools, our principals, our teachers on some social emotional standards and what that looks like. And in our strategic plan, we set one of our long-term outcomes around high school readiness. And that's not just the academic piece. That's also the social emotional side of a child's growth as they develop and become adults, and really being thoughtful and purposeful about what we need to build in order to develop young people so they are high school ready, because some of our students aren't. They may be from an academic standpoint, but they may not be from social emotional side of things. So I think partly it's setting the right kind of standards and expectations, but secondly, it's making the kind of investment that you need to. And we may have to look creatively at other ways we can invest in mental health, social workers, to actually look these children in the eye that are going through issues and maybe coming from dysfunctional home environments. What I'm struck by is how desensitized some of our children get from playing all these video games endlessly and not being engaged with other people. And a lot of times these video games are violent, and they don't have a true understanding of what that means. So I would very much be focused on not only setting standards around it, but investing in human talent to be out there on the ground to really understand and be sensitive to the needs of some of our children that are having issues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Christiansen. My question deals with succession planning. How would you put together a plan to develop a pipeline of future leaders in Palm Beach County and leaders in the classroom as well as administrative leaders?
Yeah, thank you. This is part of our strategic plan. This is actually one of our strategic initiatives, and we are engaged in this. I do want to say, from being in other systems, I feel like our succession planning and our leadership pipeline is an area of growth for us, okay? And part of that, in fairness, is the fact that we've continually churned through various leadership in that area. So that's fair. In other words, we've changed that position out every 1 to 2 years. But we have to be more clear on what that pipeline looks like, okay? How we invest in people's development, not only teachers, but the next level of teacher leaders, reading coaches, single school culture coordinators, assistant principals. The other thing that I see in our system sometimes is folks are in a pool and they have not been selected, but they're not really being given feedback about what needs to be done differently so they can be successful, or think about what other career options they might have within the pipeline. So succession planning, in my opinion, isn't just about this is who's going to succeed who. It's also being real thoughtful and purposeful about engaging every person in their own development and understanding, for example, what's their professional learning profile, what's their background in certifications, and how do we personalize their learning to get better. You know, how do we make sure we invest in each of them to make a difference in their growth.
Just to follow up, I know it is a part of the strategic plan, and people that are listening are saying, yes, we do have it on paper. But if you're selected today and people are sitting right here in Palm Beach County feeling that it's not touching them, what specifically will you do as you begin your tenure as superintendent to let people know it's alive, it's moving, and we're going to make something happen for the next level of children in Palm Beach County through teachers and future administrators?
I think in the first 90 days I would be giving you an entry plan into this role where I would very much listen, learn, and engage, very specifically teachers and principals. Because I'm convinced we have to do a better job in talent development. We have to understand that we can get better in that area, and I think it is an area of growth. We can improve, but I would want to understand from them the way they see it, okay? Because we do have wonderful things happening at the school level, let's face it. But systemically, what's that layer look like, and then how do we engage around that personalization piece? Because it doesn't always have to be face-to-face. We can do virtual learning. We can do mixed mode. There's all sorts of ways we can develop our talent. But I would, in those first 90 days, very much engage teachers and principals and hear their voice on what that looks like.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr.
Good afternoon, Dr. Robbins.
So to use an old phrase, we all know that reading is fundamental. So tell me what you would do, what you would change to make sure that each subgroup of children accelerate with reading proficiency.
Thank you. My own child as a kindergartner was labeled intellectually disabled, and my wife and I pushed back and we said, wait a second, can we test him? They tested him. He was a 136. He was gifted. What was wrong with him is he was dyslexic, severely dyslexic. So you think about how many times does that happen across our system? I remember when I went to a prison ministry with my dad called Kairos, and I walked in there and I read the letters from the children to the inmates that were 50 years old, and they couldn't read for themselves. And I was struck by, how is this possible that a 50-year-old grown man can't read for themselves? And I was struck by that some system had to fail to make this happen. So I'm convinced we have to do a better job diagnosing in the early stages, kindergarten first, what are the issues as far as reading. When Dr. Avosa and I came in here, we were primarily relying on what's called reading running records, which is a subjective instrument. Most districts had SAT 10 or degrees of reading power, what's called the DRP, as a way to understand children's needs. And as you know, this is our soft spot as a system. Since the last 2 decades, we're 4 points below the state average in third grade ELA. So clearly we need to do a better job diagnosing kids' needs and having screeners not only around dyslexia, but around, is this child gifted? Are there other exceptionalities at play? How do we meet those needs? So I think we're in the process of, through our strategic plan and strategic initiatives, addressing that. But we also have to flat out get better in our literacy instruction. And this goes back, in my opinion, to age 3. We have to look at 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, whether they're in the private pre-Ks or ours. What does that look like? Are the right standards in place? And how do we help our private providers and our public have certain expectations around what happens? Because basically with Florida standards and Common Core, you know, these kids have to write a paragraph in kindergarten. They have to be able to count to 100. These standards are different. So we have to do a better job in literacy, in my opinion, phonemic awareness, phonics, in those early learning stages so that we can move forward and then better diagnose what's happening in kindergarten and first so we can meet their needs coming forward.
Thank you for that response. You know, I get deeply into that reading conversation.
Yes,
but so on to my second question. So in my time on this school board, I have watched the pendulum swing, so to speak. So at one point in time, we were far to one side in terms of central instruction and direction and management.
Robinson,
yes?
we got to do one question at a time, so you get to come back in the second round for the second question.
Oh, theirs were called follow-ups?
Yeah, that was just follow-up. Yeah. So if you had a follow-up to the existing question, you can. Otherwise, next round, you get to ask the next question.
I can create a follow-up. May I have
Okay,
a follow-up?
go ahead.
So as you know, Dr. Christiansen, there is a group that is working, doing a deep dive into reading issues as it relates to African American children. And so some of the issues that you've mentioned have bubbled up in our research. And so the question is just simply if you will support getting information from community and people whose voice you don't normally hear with regards to reading.
Absolutely, and I also want to say sometimes we look at subgroup data like around black students or Hispanic students, and that's not specific enough. We have an opportunity now to look at the data in a different way. In other words, break out Haitian Creole, okay? Break out Guatemalan Mayan. Why do we look at it in these big umbrellas? Because it's just different. Country of origin, country of birth. Those are ways that we can look at data differently. But to answer your question, absolutely. We need to engage our community in this because this isn't, We can't solve this literacy issue alone. We have to engage all our partners, the Children's Services Council, all the different people at play in this place.
Thank you. Can you share with us what your expectations are from the board in order for us to move forward?
Thank you. If successfully selected, what I would like to do is actually sit with the board and talk about how we're going to work together. What's going to be our vision? What's going to be our way of governance? In my opinion, I would be highly proactive in regards to setting up communication protocols. I think if you look at my experience in Lake and Fresno, for example, I had more of a role in that particular area where I would very much engage each board member in what was coming in the workshops, what was coming in the meetings, and get not only go through the agenda, but also to understand your thinking around the big issues, not only the controversial hot issues that we always talk about, but also the bigger, more productive, long-term kind of systemic work that we're trying to do, and get your opinions and elicit your input around that piece. But my philosophy of working with the board would be no surprises, no blind sides, that we very much are highly communicative, and that we have a shared leadership model, that we become a high-performance team, that we become a governance team. And I've seen through different experiences how that process can play out successfully and effectively.
Thank you. And no follow-up, so we'll go to the second round. Mrs. McQuinn.
This is a two-parter, but it's all one question. How would you describe the current culture of our school district? Be specific. How will you keep a pulse on the system's climate and culture?
I think the current climate of our school system is positive. I think it's focused on students. It's student-centric. I do think we've swung the pendulum very much with our strategic plan in a student-centric kind of focus. Okay, there's no doubt about that, especially with a focus on equity. I think we do need to look at, as far as the culture of our school system, where is the teacher voice and principal voice in the work? So what I can very much assure you of as superintendent is that's something I would be proactive and very active to make that become a reality, and engage not only on the ground in the schools, but in a productive way with the Principals Association, with CTA, with a group of teacher leaders we call ESET, Elevating and Celebrating Effective Teachers, and really understanding where they sit on a lot of the big issues. Right now, I think our strategic plan has swung it this way. It's not that we have to swing the pendulum all the way back, but I think we have the opportunity now to make sure that teacher voice and student voice figure more prominently. The second question, can you help me with that second question?
How will you keep a pulse on our system's climate and culture?
Right. So as deputy superintendent, I had a specific role. And I think some people only look at me through the lens of that, let's face it, okay, as maybe the person that executed or enforced or these different things. As superintendent, how I would monitor systems is through the data. I mean, we'd want to look at the data, but I think when it comes to culture and climate, you have to get out there on the ground. I mean, you have to really open up your ears, and I think we need to look at a 360-degree kind of system. So, for example, why couldn't principals on a quarterly basis give anonymous feedback about the principal supervisors? Okay? Right now, as you know, Dr. Avosa and I brought this concept of departments getting grades. All our departments in our central office now get grades, and that's from each school site. They actually determine how they'd like to rate each department. So we could continue that, But I also see the need at the teacher level with principals, but also the principal level with their principal supervisors to make sure and understand what their perceptions are of what kind of support they're getting from that principal supervisor and what that looks like moving forward.
Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. Dr. Christiansen, what is your philosophy on delegating authority? How do you then maintain accountability?
I think you have to have a plan, and what's wonderful about where we are right now is we do have a strategic plan, so that's a positive. We've also put some accountability in place at the central office and also out in the schools. But I think as superintendent, my philosophy would be to set certain expectations as a framework, but I am very much one that believes in site-based autonomy. I believe in empowering teachers and principals to do their job. That's why we hire the talent. We need to let these talented people be creative, be innovative, but we do need to hold them to certain high expectations. And the expectations aren't just about a letter on the door. Just because it says A on the door does not mean we shouldn't look at all these other pieces. And as you know, with our principal dashboard, we look at what's happening with the climate, what's happening with the subgroups around discipline, what's happening with subgroups around attendance, what's happening with teacher attendance, looking at all those different pieces. As superintendent, I need to trust my people and empower them to do a good job, but I also need to be observant and trust but verify and look at the metrics that are playing out across our whole school system, whether or not it's on the operational side of the house or the academic side of the house. And when we see an issue with metrics, it's kind of this earned autonomy piece. If you're getting great results for all children, guess what? You get more and more autonomy. But if you start to not deliver in regards to getting results for all children, and we start seeing something where we start to see concerns in climate, in culture, in metrics across academic operational, well then maybe we need to have more side-by-side support and also accountability.
All right. Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. Can you please address how you would address criticism and conflict?
Well, I'm blessed with the ability to go to bed each night and actually sleep and get up the next day and start anew. This, David Gergen called the superintendency the most complex job in America because you have, everyone's an expert in education because they've had one, right? We have obviously a lot of different situations going on. This is like a Fortune 500 company. And I've sat right next to Dr. Avosa, and I've seen the good, bad, and ugly, okay? This is a $3 billion organization. There are 25,000 employees. And at times, this can't be a popularity contest. My grandpa used to say, like wins a sprint, respect wins a marathon. In other words, sometimes we have to make the hard decisions as superintendent or deputy that need to be made in order to make sure our system is successful. So I think how I deal with criticism and conflict is, number one, at the level of the school, we have to hear people out. We have to listen. One thing that very much gets under my skin is when I have a situation that would bubble up to me and we haven't even had a sit down. When somebody doesn't even have a sit down with somebody and hear them out, that's unacceptable to me. Sometimes you can't do these things over the phone, right? We need to hear out what the concerns are. We need to make people feel listened and valued, and then we need to do our best to address that. But the reality is criticism and conflict is a way of life in this role, and you have to have the moral compass and the core values and the, I would say, the ability to be have a sustainable work ethic around that where you don't get hypersensitive, okay, about that, because it's a natural thing. You also have to have the trust in your your central office staff, your principals, that they will actually tell you what you don't want to hear. You know, that's an authentic relationship, and I'm blessed with the team in academic cabinet that they sometimes say, Dr. C, this isn't working. This did not work. You mishandled this. And I say, thank you. I say, you know, thank you for being honest with me. Thank you for having that candor. And I appreciate that. And that's the kind of culture that we need to have. We don't need to sugarcoat things. We need to be honest about what's wrong and what's right, and we need to deal with it.
Mr. Barbieri.
Well, since my great questions about single school culture and talent development have already been asked by other board members, I came up with a new one, so it's not probably one of the best ones I could have come up with, but since I spent days thinking about the questions that I wanted to ask you. Dr. Vosa has restructured the district into regions, and as you know, there's a regional superintendent and instructional superintendents. We also have an organizational chart which was substantially revised by Dr. Vosa. Can you provide your thoughts as to whether you support the regional structure, what changes you would make, not in personnel, but in structure, that you believe should be made, if any, in the regional structure, and what changes you believe should be made in the organization of the district?
Well, one of the things we tried to do when we set up this structure, we felt like the traditional structure was like 45, 50 schools per area soup. And although they did have a director, we were almost doing flybys where we didn't have deep and intimate knowledge on what the issues were to really support principals. So we decided to go to this model where the regional soups would only have a portfolio of 5 to 8, but they would be the most complex schools. I believe this model is working because we have 36% of our schools that are identified as schools of excellence, the highest percentage in Florida. We have no F-rated schools. We've gone from 36 DA schools to 3. But I do think now that we've gone 2 years in, there has to be some modifications. One of the pieces I would like to look at is a little bit more robust feedback loop around what's happening between principals and principal supervisors and their relationships, because at times that's we got to make sure the principals are getting productive support, right? And so we have to evaluate that on, I think, a quarterly basis in an anonymous way. But I also think as we improve schools, we have to eliminate this yo-yo effect that has occurred in the past, because as much as we're improving, and we, for example, extend the day for certain schools, we give them all these resources, and then they become a B or A rated, and what do? We take it all away, and then next thing you know, the school goes back down, right? So I think part of this model has to be, once we make a certain investment in a Title I school, for example, we continue that level of investment regardless of the grade. You actually keep that investment at the level, and that way you have sustainability. Now, maybe the investment isn't exactly what the school and principal wants, but we give them as much as we possibly can. And as you know, Dr. Avosa and I made the decision to eliminate this $4 million Office of Transformation. We eliminated 85 positions at the district level, and we said, let's push those investments at the school level. We don't need people driving all around the largest county east of the Mississippi. We need these people in the schools actually making a difference on a daily basis. So I think right now is the opportunity, once we get our results in June, is to evaluate this model and say, what modifications do we need to make? Because my goal and our goal would be all A and B rated schools, but possibly even more importantly, that we're not only raising the bar, we're closing the achievement gap between all subgroups.
Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. Dr. Christiansen, I know that we have the strategic plan, but I'm looking now for something that you've actually led yourself, a personal achievement that you're actually involved with. What have you done to positively impact student achievement with the assistance of teachers, principals, parents, and a community involvement. Can you detail a successful effort or project to close the achievement gap? How is it going with this project, something that you actually implemented as the leader?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Andrews. I'm going to use the example of the master schedule analysis. So that's a process that I had seen at Long Beach, California, which is a 90-90 district, one of the most highest performing. So they have 90% of their students that are free and reduced lunch, yet 90% are proficient. So that's a high-performing district in California. They had a process that was similar, but what we do is we look at, in every school, it's what's happening with the master schedule. Because the master schedule sets your priorities. That's basically the school's Bible. It's who's teaching what, okay? How do students access what courses, right? And what decisions are being made programmatically to improve student outcomes. So what we did is we sat with the leadership team, the principals, and we used a Socratic seminar method. A lot of different people are involved in this process, and the principal and the instructional leadership team actually take this out to their PTA and SAC as well and talk about programmatic changes, if they're going to selectively abandon a program, or if they say want to add ACE or IB or these courses, and they get feedback from the community and so forth. So that process takes place at every level in every school, all 187, high school, middle school, elementary. And what I can tell you is that's not top down. It's actually driven by the school. It's driven by the needs of the school. We ask hard questions, but we don't make the decisions. The school does. But ultimately, what I can tell you about the results, and you guys have seen this in our instructional reviews at the mid-year and the end of the year, is that we are closing the opportunity gap. We have more students accessing accelerated courses at the middle school and high school level than we ever have, and more students are, the footprint of industry certification, even at the middle school level, has dramatically changed, where students are walking out of 8th grade into high school with an industry cert. So can we improve this process? Absolutely. Do we need to make sure more stakeholders are involved? Absolutely. But I remember I attended one of these sessions recently at a high school, and they were asking hard questions around who's teaching our 9th graders. Because the 9th grade year is critical. If a 9th grader gets a 1.0, there's almost no chance for that child to graduate because they have to get 3 consecutive 3.0s to graduate. So who is involved in these 9th grade courses, especially the reading courses? And the principal was making some hard decisions around, look, let's share the wealth. Let's have this particular teacher think about, investing in this particular reading class, because we need our best people in the most important year, which in high school is 9th grade. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So I'm with Mr. Barbieri. So since Karen Brill took my question, I had to come up with a new question. So data shows correlation between household income, wealth, and academic achievement. Our data in this school district, as well as across the nation, shows that children living in poverty generally underperform as compared to their peers. So we're the largest employer in Palm Beach County. Is it in our best interest to work to end poverty? And if so, how do we go about that? What is our role?
Well, education is the linchpin of our democracy. I mean, I think what our role is, obviously we need to deliver a world-class education. We need to deliver on our mission. We need to have equity and access for all students to a world-class education, regardless of where they live. And at times, we look at, I think we looked at this data a couple months ago, who's teaching in our Title I schools? And how well are we able to retain high-quality teachers in our Title I schools? Teacher compensation is a huge issue, and this is across the board. We may have to ask our community to step up around teacher compensation for all our teachers. I learned the other day in Leadership Palm Beach County that the average Palm Beach home is $347,000. Who can afford that? We have to look at compensation differently. This is a very expensive place to live. But specifically to ending poverty, you look at our communities that are more high poverty. Let's go out to the Glades where we have a 35% unemployment rate. The quality of what's happening in every classroom needs to be the same as out on the coast. And I am dedicated to that. I've spent more time in the Glades than most, okay? And if you look at those schools in the Glades, we only have one school now in the DA, and that was by 1 point, Gove Elementary. And that school's making tremendous progress. So our responsibility, I believe, is excellence and world-class education for all kids, delivering on wherever you live, and that way students can be proud to stay in their neighborhood schools. They don't have to leave and go to all these different choices. They can say, I'm proud to live in this community, and I know I can get a high-quality education, and I know programmatically I can access anything I want. I can go to a four-year university. I can go to a state college. I can go into technical vocational. I mean, that's, in my opinion, our responsibility.
Yes? So that was a very sound academic answer and reminiscent of, how I was raised that education is the key. But do we have a role using the operating side of the house to help end poverty?
That's a complex issue. I would want to give that further thought on the operational side of the house. I do think if you look at the progress that we've made, for example, in salaries of, let's say, bus drivers, for example, we need to continue to increase, I believe, the salaries of our classified staff. There's no doubt about it. And we need to figure out a way, and we need to get creative. And again, we may have to, right now, if you look at our current budget situation, I mean, it isn't very encouraging. So how do we, again, look at our return on investment and optimize resources differently so that we compensate our staff appropriately and really look at what is a living wage and how do we need to improve our wages for our workers, because we have a lot of not only full-time workers but also part-time, 25,000 or less. So how can we change that?
Thank you. And I've had to take two of my questions off. So my question for you now is related to legislative issues and what is our role and the board. So what is your role and your experience with the legislature, and what is the board's role, and how does that tie into kind of a follow-up to Dr. Robinson on economic development in this county?
Yes, sir. We need to have, obviously, a sound legislative platform that makes sense. But I think we definitely need to understand when we're with the key players in the legislation, how we can impact and access change. Right now, we need to look at our legislative liaison and the way that particular employee works with the legislators and engages in this work. As we found with House Bill 7069, at times, this happens at the last moment, but we need to be able to sniff that out earlier and be able to engage the right stakeholders and do our best to make a difference. I also think when you talk about the big issues, obviously what's on the horizon right now is school safety. I mean, I think that's right there and in front of everyone, and now we need to think about how do we take advantage of that. Whether or not the governor's proposal, how that plays out, but looking at to ensure that a school police officer is in every building, okay? That not that we arm our teachers, but that we have that school police officer in every building, that we look at issues around mental health. I think legislators on both sides of the aisle are open to school safety and looking at that piece. The second big issue we have to address is teacher compensation. And whether or not we're able to do that through legislation we obviously need to consider other creative ways of making a change in the way we compensate our teachers. And the final piece, I think, in regards to what I see in Palm Beach County and what I've seen in other counties, is, in my opinion, one of our areas of growth is around the industry technical footprint in Palm Beach County. In my opinion, too many folks are slipping between the cracks. We do not have the technical schools and technical training that other school systems have. And I know in 1998 we signed off an MOU with Palm Beach State, and there is a certain footprint out there that exists through that. But I think we need to look at the world differently, because too many times I'm seeing that our school system is fine for a certain group of students, but then you look at other groups that cycle back in as adults, and we're not meeting their industry and technical needs.
Thank you very much. That concludes the questions. So at this time, closing statement.
Okay. Thank you for your time today. I'm honored to be here. I love Palm Beach County. I'm committed to this county. You know, I talked about faith, family, and focus. I'm happily married 19 years. Kim, my wife, and 3 boys, public school educated. I went to the oldest public university in the nation, University of North Carolina, and I'm committed to public education. I think you guys have seen that in my the integrity of my character over the last 3 years, but also the other 25 that I've served across various school systems. I feel I'm uniquely qualified to be the next superintendent. I have sat for the last 3 years in that superintendent suite, and every major decision that we've made, I've had a voice in that decision. And not only that, I've a lot of times been the engine in regards to the day-to-day and making sure the results play out well for kids. That this isn't just a system of schools, but this is a school system, you know, and that we can make a difference for all students to reach their full potential as learners.
Thank you very much. So we appreciate it. So the next candidate will be on their way, and just so the public's aware, the questions that the board asks will be the same questions to each one of the candidates.